This is all actually very hush-hush. This article is a little bit old now. It is from formerly IO9, now Gizmodo, and this is the only article I could find about what it actually costs to run a university science lab. And the reason I'm referencing this article from 2011 is that no one really likes to disclose exactly how much it costs to run a science lab. We know about the publicly named funding sources, but every kind of research in any kind of field costs a different amount of money. And this money is also tied up in professors' leverage. If they've got different appointments at different universities, or if they're very high profile, it's all independently negotiated. These numbers are a little bit outdated, but I just want to get a sense and give you a sense of what are the actual costs of running a science lab, and can any of these costs be offset by something like that WeWork model of shared office spaces. A new scientist, fresh with a new laboratory at their disposal, they may be given a startup package by that university. This sounds pretty generous to me. Can be anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, depending on the kind of research they're doing, and it's intending to allow college professors to hit the ground running, buy the equipment they need, hire a few people to get started, and be on their way doing their groundbreaking research. This money, it sounds like a lot, is going to run out really soon, especially if it's salaries. In Australia, the average scientist's salary costs, if you include things like on costs and superannuation and insurance, all that kind of stuff, let's say $100,000. So if the startup package is, say, $500,000, then you can afford to pay one scientist for 5 years, or 5 scientists for 1 year. You kind of do need quite a few people on your team being very productive all at the same time. So $500,000 evaporate, and this money does not go very far. Once this money runs out, the university does not go, hey, here's another $500,000, here's another $1 million. This is where it's up to you as the individual faculty member or scientist to pony up, not of your own personal money, hopefully, but of your ability to negotiate and apply for grant funding. In the United States, it's, I believe, NIH and SF, as well as any charitable organizations. In Australia, it's NHMRC, ARC, as well as a suite of, hopefully, charitable organizations. A combination of public funding agencies that are funded by tax dollars, as well as some private money, hopefully through charities that you can raise of your own accord. Once you raise that money, you then start dealing with the costs of everyday science. We've already talked about salaries. Scientist salary, $100,000 for one scientist for 1 year. Again, that's Australia. In other parts of the world, it might not be quite as high or quite as low. Then on top of that, you got to pay for consumables, which can be anywhere from $20,000 or more per year. Some chemicals, a flask of cells, to keep that flask of cells alive for 1 week can cost hundreds of dollars, and you're not just working with one flask of cells at any one point in time. This kind of thing does tend to escalate. And if you want to buy new equipment, a fancy new microscope, a fancy new machine to measure something that you've never measured before, these machines usually are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is a very quick way for your cost to add up. And on top of that, universities do take a cut of the money that you bring in. So if you get a grant, let's say it's for $500,000, you don't get a check for $500,000. The university takes a portion of that. The rate depends on where you work, but 45, 50, 60% of the money, that's not uncommon. That huge portion goes to university to cover things like rent, keeping the lights on, electricity, water, as well as insurance. In my field of biological sciences, a huge cost is just the insurance in case people get hurt, in case some of the chemicals get leaked, in case some of the biological agents aren't properly regulated, properly stored. All of that goes towards the regulatory side, which is also very, very expensive. This is hardly a scientist crying poor, but this is actually a scientist crying poor. These grants that get announced in the news, $500,000 for research for this disease, sounds like it should be enough to fix the problem, but often we're just going towards paying a few scientists for a couple of years and paying for some research reagents, some consumables. So these grants, pots of money, they don't last all that long. So can we lower the cost of things like consumables, and can we lower the cost of things like rent, having to pay for insurance, if we go to a WeWork style model? A lot of science buildings are shared by multiple labs where multiple different kinds of research are happening, and in theory it works great because you can have different types of scientists working in the same space, a chemist working with a biologist, working next to a physicist, all of whom are collaborating. In reality, people are quite territorial about the space they have. You don't want your equipment being left really dirty. You don't want the lab bench to be covered in some kind of dust that you're not sure what it it is because a different research group was using it a second ago. There is, of course, intellectual property. It's not shared equally amongst all the people who are sharing that space. I'm curious how WeWork handles things like intellectual property. If someone signs a form and leaves it on the printer, all the other people in the shared workspaces now have seen that printout, if they have to have policies to protect themselves from that kind of leaked IP. But generally speaking, these shared office spaces, everyone is pretty crowded, everyone's pretty crammed in. As scientists, we're trying to make the most of it, but often it leads to more tension over time, and people are always fighting for more and more lab space, more and more office space.